Military Posts, Creative and Clinical Outlets and Electronic Music with Dr. Martin van Klompenberg. Stay inspired. So Martin, would you mind diving in and telling us all about your bassoon?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm probably one of the few people. I play a Fox 201, which, as you know, Julie, from our time at Arizona State, that's what our teacher basically forced upon us. Um, he didn't make people buy them, but it was always the first thing you had to try when looking for a new instrument. And so about in 2009 or thereabouts, I went through a thing where I tried a lot of different bassoons. I think one of the bassoons I tried, I think Joey actually plays now. Uh, but just I think I played 18 bassoons over the course of a summer, and just as terrible as this sounds, the bassoon I picked was the one that I opened the case, and I was just thought this is the most beautiful bassoon I've ever seen, and I lucked out that it actually was the best bassoon I played. Um, it's kind of a it was right after Fox changed the wood. So yeah, I have the previous, the not red maple wood, and it looks like the person who did the tiger striping was like having an off day. So the striping is super light on it, and it doesn't. I've never seen a Fox with that coloration before because the staining and tiger striping is so light on it for a Fox. So I like it because it's unique for doesn't have that same maroonish color that most Foxes have. The biggest thing is I found personally for me, I don't know if it's my personal setup, but I have found that that gold vocals work better for me on this particular horn. And it's probably a little bit of the horn. It's probably a little bit of, my physiological setup. But it turned out that the gold vocal could create a more resonant sound than even high end like Heckle vocals. So it's very odd and also makes my bassoon just look a little bit blingier every time I play.
So Martin, you are a bassoonist and soldier with United States Army bands. Could you tell us what military posts are?
Oh yeah. So basically, I'm located at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, which is about an hour northwest of Nashville, and we're basically our own little city in the middle of nowhere. Like there's literal walls keeping civilian people from coming on without being allowed. And most of what we do in work, in terms of being a soldier or a bassoonist, is done on this post. And so it's inclusive you know, we so that we can live our lives without ever having to worry about outside stuff. So like we have grocery stores, and we have we have a department store that's on every place, and bowling alleys and movie theaters. None of that stuff is open right now because of the pandemic, but we have them.
Could you tell us what 20-minute gigs are and what they are and how they work?
Yeah. Okay. Uh, so what we do, like the primary thing I play, I've gotten lucky with a few of my groups. We've been able to go out and do like full on recitals, like you would do when you were in school. But most of what we do are little 15 to 20-minute performances that lead up to a military ceremony. And it was very, very hard for me I came straight out of doing my DMA into the Army to kind of wrap my brain around. I was playing, in Maslanka symphonies and the Weber concerto, and now I'm playing John Philip Sousa marches arranged for woodwind quintet. And it took me a long time to wrap my brain around that idea of like, this is just as important and just as necessary. But once I did it became a lot more fun. I can, with 15, 20 minutes, especially with our usual audience is soldiers, and a lot of our audiences are younger enlisted soldiers, like soldiers who are 18, 19, 20 years old. So we can have a lot of fun with the music we select. We do a lot of marches. We try to find unique ones, and don't play Stars and Stripes Forever for every single performance, but I have played it at least 100 times in the last 7.5 years. And but we also get things like some of my leadership. are incredibly big Star Wars fans. So if we know that they're going to show up to the ceremony, one of the last things we'll play is the theme music from the Mandalorian TV show, because it has been expressed several times how much, the lieutenant colonel who's in charge of my boss likes that. And so you get to do this thing where you get to pick a fun piece of music, and it engages the audience more, because we're not playing for people who generally like, classical music per se. We're playing for people who listen to a lot more pop music and stuff like patriotic music, things like that. So we do these little 15, 20-minute performances every time, and just, you figure out what the audience is going to be, and you kind of pick a set of music for it that, that particular audience is going to like, depending on if it's lower enlisted soldiers or civilians coming to support someone on the military base or something like that.
Are you on a military post now?
Yes. Yep. I live. This is the first time in my career. You have the option to live on a post or off a post. I chose to live on a post this time because my wife and I were relocated in the middle of the prime part of the pandemic last summer, and this just made the logistics of moving much, much easier. But it's also nice because I'm 3 minutes away from my job.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I don't have to leave very early to get to work on time, and I get to come home for lunch every single day because it's 3 minutes away. And so there are parts of it you don't like, parts of it you do like. There's a lot of helicopter sounds because we have Fort Campbell has the Army's only air assault unit, which is people who repel out of helicopters. And those helicopters are flying around constantly. But it's not any worse in Arizona than near the airport in Phoenix.
So we were talking about clinical and creative outlets at work. Are there other ways that you've found kind of a creative outlet in your work?
Well, some of it I've done is because there isn't a whole lot of popular music written for woodwind quintet that's not absolutely terrible. A lot of it is I've become an arranger a lot in the last 7 years. Like, I've done quite a bit of arranging and trying to find ways to make stuff that's not written for winds not sound so cheesy for winds, which is an impossible battle. But sometimes you find ways around it. And it's just kind of nice because with whatever group I'm playing in at a time, we're together a couple times a week for rehearsals. So you have a chance to try things out, try to find ways to make the music more interesting as woodwind players. So that's a big part of what I do to make life more interesting on the post is, you arrange things. Sometimes it's movie music or even marches, or sometimes I've snuck classical things in that I know fit into war movies so that we can play something a little more substantial. But so I have a large folder on my computer now of stuff I've arranged over the last 8 years for wind quintet.
Martin, I was thinking back with your marching. So, with bassoon and in the States when we're doing marching band, we always do something else. So how does bassoon work in marching band? And is it more you're sitting, or how does that work with the other instruments?
So ironically enough, marching band was my least favorite part of band in high school because I had to play the cymbals. So I quit doing band. I went to college, got graduate degrees, joined the Army, and now I play cymbals in a marching band professionally. It's part of the job. So, bassoonist, most of the bassoonists in the Army will play some saxophone. I am really, really bad at the saxophone. So I play cymbals or bass drum for marches. I'm actually doing some training now to start becoming a drum major for our band on occasion, that some of the older people who've been in longer can do some stuff. But yeah, it's simple levels of percussion. It's much easier than what we did when I was in high school for that. A bass drum only plays when your left foot hits the ground because we're marching soldiers when we march, and non-musicians don't have, great rhythm, generally speaking. So you just want to keep them on the pulse so that they look pretty when they're marching across the grandstands.
We were talking about how there's no real audience while you perform. Could you share a bit more about what that means?
So like I was saying before, with most of our performances are 15 to 20 minutes before a ceremony. And very, very rarely is anyone actively listening to us. We perform and we're noticed, like people are thankful we're there. I think it really adds to the ambiance and the officialness of a ceremony to have a musical presence there. But depending on what we're playing, we're probably not going to get noticed. You might have one or two people come up and say thank you for an audience. But if a band is not there, you'll hear the next time you hear those go around that group of people, oh, we really wish you were here for this thing. So you're playing for an audience that is not captive. They're not hanging on your every note, but they know you're there. And I kind of thought about this after our discussion, after our interview, and the only thing I can equate it to in a weird way is being like the musicians at Disney World, where very few people sit there and they listen to the whole set that the Dapper Dans sing on Main Street, USA. But you're really glad that if you see them, you stop for 30 seconds, you listen to your song, and you move on your way, and it adds a great ambiance to the venue. It fills out the whole feeling. So you have the flags and the uniforms and all the pomp and circumstance that you get for a ceremony, and the music just fills out the whole picture. We found it interesting in the last year because, like everyone else, we're still doing our ceremonies on the post, but a lot of them haven't been open to the public. So this is the most captive audience we've had in a while, because some of our stuff is actually getting webcast before these ceremonies now. We'll have actual cameras focused on the band for 5 minutes before the ceremony, and then moved on to the ceremony. And so it is getting more noticed. It's kind of one of the few perks of the pandemic for us as musicians in the military.
How did you stay motivated?
I took a lot of solace in knowing that I had one of the few jobs where I was making music for most of the pandemic. Even when I was in South Carolina at the very beginning, last April and May, we were still doing graduations for basic training soldiers. There was nobody in the stands, and we were marching the world's widest parade formation marching band, so that we were, outside the social distancing limits. We were like 10, 12 feet away from each other instead of the usual 2 feet away. But we were still there playing for that. And as we got to know more and more about the different things, we started doing more music, especially outside. I have, in the last year, played a ceremony outside that was 95 degrees, and I have played one that's 37 degrees.
Wow.
And so it was not good for my bassoon at all. I definitely use my government bassoon for those extreme hot, extreme cold ones, because they have more money to fix that and repair things than I do. But yeah, as things have gotten better, we've gotten the opportunity to do more, whereas a lot of my musician friends have been limited to like doing online video work and Zoom recordings with their counterparts.
Could you tell us more about what a government bassoon is and how that works?
Okay, yeah. So every band in the Army has got a full slate of professional instruments for everyone in the band. So right now, I have a 601 Fox that I use as my government bassoon. It's nicer because it's a bit bigger, louder instrument, because I only really use it outside, because it's too big of a bassoon for the dining rooms and conference rooms that my woodwind quintet normally plays in. But so all of our flute players have 2 professional flutes and a professional piccolo.
Wow.
Yeah, everyone is you basically you can ask for it and you'll get it. The professional horn. They try to keep it standardized, so like the Army sticks a lot with Fox 601s.
Okay.
But there are people playing on. I know Derek Banish, who I just found out is going to be a student of Michael Burns later this fall. He plays a Mooseman in his band, and so you can get other horns, but you just got to keep it consistent, because every time you move to a new band, you have to use that band's instruments.
So you have 2 bassoons?
Yeah, I have my personal bassoon, which is the one I was talking about at the beginning, and that one stays inside. If I'm playing inside, I will use that for most things, because my personal bassoon and my government bassoon are just different enough that reed making is difficult to make reeds that work well on both. And I'm doing just enough bouncing around that I can't really do that. But I do use, like, the horn I have right now here at Fort Campbell is by far the nicest Fox 601 I've ever played. I kind of don't want to ever, let it go when I have to leave here, because it's a beautiful, beautiful horn that I'm upset that I'm going to have to leave at some point.
Did you pick that one out at Fort Campbell, or was it something that another colleague of yours picked years ago, or?
No, I lucked out in that I'm the first bassoonist at Fort Campbell in about 15 years, because they just changed, about 2 years ago, they changed how the lineups work for all of the Army bands, where it used to be every band had kind of a different setup based on where you were located. Now all of them are exactly the same, except for the 2 overseas bands. And so they just got this band from another band that wanted to get rid of the bassoon they weren't using. And I was like, and they apologized profusely to me when I got here. Like, we tried to get you a brand new bassoon, and it's probably about 15 years old. This 15-year-old 601 I have is fantastic. So, but yeah, in general, you could, that's how you can get that stuff pretty easily.
I wonder what the story is with that bassoon, or or who was playing on it before, or do you know any of that?
I know the bassoon player who was at the band the bassoon came from didn't like that bassoon as much as the one she was using, and that's why it got sent to us. And I was like, okay, your loss is my win. So
Joey has shared a really great question about with phrasing and like playing outside and not being able to hear your colleagues. What was that like being, 10, 12 feet apart from each other?
It was hard.
Phrasing, Martin, was it hard?
It was hard. You could go back and watch like the videos, because they did video broadcasts of all these graduations. And if they playing the bass drum, if you were hitting it hard enough, it usually compensated for it. But if you were getting, as the ceremony goes on, you get more and more tired, because at one point you're playing 20 straight minutes of boom, 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 and your arms just kind of give out after a while. And at that point, if the whole band is not paying attention to the commander in the front of the band, things can go real squirrely real quick.
Is there a method that everyone uses to like line it up when they realize it breaks? Do you know what I mean?
The 2 most important people in a military marching band are the drum major or commander and the bass drum player. Like, every band I've been in, the commander will just stare straight to his left at the bass drum player for the vast majority of the thing, because that's the only 2 people. If those 2 people line up, they'll keep any band in time.
Clever.
It's one of the nice things about us using the simple marching cadences.
Right.
For marching troops, it helps with the phasing, that stuff a lot, because you're not trying to fit it into more elaborate drum parts.
Less is more.
Less is definitely more.
Interesting. That's right, he did.
Yeah, Michael's shared a comment. Sousa said the same thing, all about the bass drum. Martin, I wanted to ask you another bassoon question. I was thinking with your individual bassoon and then the government bassoon, even though the government bassoon was about 15 years older, have you noticed like very obvious changes in like the padding or the quality of the wood, or like of playing this instrument, this bassoon outside compared to the instrument you've kept inside?
Yes and no. It's a little bit different with this bassoon, because this bassoon I have at Fort Campbell is only about 2,000 numbers off from my current bassoon. So they're pretty close in age for Foxes. But in the past, I've played on bassoons that were much, much newer. Like, I had one of the first, when Fox was still making the 680. I think that was the one that they made very briefly and then quit making. The band I played in at San Antonio got the 3rd and 4th ones off the line. And those, you could really notice a difference between the 2. And also because they were so new, and so like every aspect of them was so new, the break-in process was really painful. Like, it was just, Fox hadn't worked out all the kinks on things, so we would play on, and every about 3 months we'd have to bring them. There was a guy named Justin Young in San Antonio who was a very good repairman, and we would just go with a laundry list of problems. This. And I think that's ultimately why Fox stopped making that model of bassoon, and went back to the 660. But it was painful to go between those two bassoons because there was so much difference. It wasn't just a keywork thing. It was like it felt like you were playing a different instrument. Not quite as bad as like going from bassoon to contra, but it did kind of have that like similar vibe to it. That's a lot of reason why I stick with my personal horn most of the time. It's just because you have to, even though we said like you're not have a captive audience, you have a captive audience for exactly two things on every ceremony, and it's the national anthem and the Army song. And for better or for worst, I am probably the most important person on both of those, because I'm laying down the bass for the national anthem, so I'm setting the pitch, and I play the first note of the Army song and set the tempo. So if I don't have a bassoon that I feel super comfortable with, it's real easy to derail those two things real quick, and those are the things that everyone pays attention to.
How do the elements affect that outdoor bassoon?
It's not so bad here because Kentucky's a pretty moderate climate, so we don't have super bad here. When I was in San Antonio, we'd have to play outside a lot in the summers when you'd be playing 90 plus degrees regularly. You had to bring those in a lot. It was real bad for the instruments because just they're not meant to be at that heat level all the time, especially being played, because when you're playing on a bassoon at that heat level, it's just not good for it. And then likewise, when I was
like, what happens to it, or like, do you feel like it's hot, or like you can just feel it not vibrating, or like what is happening
with that? You can also, if you play a long concert and on the bassoon and it's 95 degrees, the next time you put it together, you'll notice that the joints don't fit together quite the same way they did. It's not a huge difference, but every time you do that, the wood has been altered just that fraction of a percentage each time.
Where it's shrinking, it's losing its moisture, or it's I guess
depending on sometimes shrinking if it's very humid, sometimes growing. And that was the growing bassoon was a bigger problem when I was in South Carolina, because South Carolina was extremely humid all the time. But in Texas, it was a lot of times they said it was shrinking, and so your bassoon would get kind of knocked around a little bit because the tenons would shrink with all that heat. We had one when I was at Fort Sam Houston in San Antonio that did crack. It's got to be really dry for a bassoon to crack. They're much more forgiving than clarinets and oboes. But when you're dealing with, our building had broken air conditioning for about 3 weeks one summer, and we're trying to rehearse and get ready for performances in a building with broken air conditioning in South Texas heat in July. That's just not good for instruments. Thankfully, if you know a really good repair tech, I think bassoon cracks are a little more forgiving than oboe and clarinet. At least that's what I've been told.
It would be wonderful to hear more about the music opportunities that you're seeking outside of your job.
Yeah, so one of the nice things about the job is I can get them to usually pay for me to go and do outside creative things. Like, I've been lucky, I've been able to go to all the IDRSs. I've actually seen Joey play at several IDRSs since I've joined. And so I get opportunities to do stuff like that, and it reaches out and you get to network and figure out, stuff like that. And that's one way I can do it, where you get a few times a year, you get to reach out and do something a little more musically satisfying. Because, you got to pay the bills with Sousa, but you got to keep your heart full with something else every now and then. And so I did that, and in the past few years, I've been meeting with composers, and like once a year, I've been trying to work with new composers to just commission something that I can realistically perform, whether it be like on like a unaccompanied piece or a piece for like 2 instruments, so that I can find a way to collaborate with people, kind of, utilize a lot of that creative stuff that I'm not necessarily doing from day to day, and just find a way to get joy onto the music instead of just utilizing music, which is sometimes how you feel in the Army. Is just, when you're playing the same 7 songs over and over and over, at times it gets a bit, it's important, but it's not the most exciting.
Could you tell us more in detail just about the YouTube woodwind quintet and the recording project?
Well, I think that has changed actually a little bit since we did, because we got new people in our band, and so we actually are now doing probably semi-monthly, bi-monthly. What's every 2 months? Whatever every 2 months is. We're going to be doing these recording projects for like various holidays and important anniversaries in the country, stuff like that. And so we're doing one. We just filmed it and recorded it this past week with a video that we're doing for the anniversary of Victory in Europe Day, which is May 9th. So we found a piece of music and we played it with my very atypically instrumented woodwind quintet right now, because we're down a couple people. But so we're playing in a quintet where it's flute, C clarinet, B flat clarinet, alto sax, and bassoon. And so we found a piece that worked really well for that celebrated that and kind of paid homage to, the people who perished in World War II in Europe. But we're going to be doing more and more stuff like that throughout the year now that we're able to do, especially now that we're able to be within 5 feet of each other again, slowly and more and more.
Could you tell us some of the work you've done with electronics?
Yeah, I've commissioned 2 pieces in the last 5 years now for Bassoon Electronics. I commissioned a piece called Power Transfer by Jamie Sampson, who is someone who literally wrote the book on bassoon extended technique. And she and I are actually lucky. We're going to be doing a performance for the IURS Virtual Symposium later this summer on some music of hers. But she wrote a book for me, or a piece for me, based for bassoon with pre-recorded media, where you amplify the bassoon in a way that so you can add just richness to the sound with all the extended technique and multiphonic playing that she has in the piece. And then I did a second piece with a composer named Dylan Finley, who I met when I went to the Amani Winds Chamber Festival 5 or 6 years ago, who is in Kansas City now, and he wrote a piece for Bassoon Electronics that's entirely based on the sounds of the Everglades. But everything in the piece is you create the sounds. So it's actually, in a lot of ways, it's similar to Michael's piece about the swamp song, but instead of having the pre-recorded track, you feed all your sound through a computer, and then the computer spits out and distorts your sounds in various ways to create all these effects. On one occasion, this was something I joked about when I joined the Army. I was like, I want to play bassoon with an Army rock band one time. And I actually did get to do that one time. I got to play bassoon with an Army rock band where I put my bassoon through a guitar pedal board, because there was no the guitar player and the bass player for that particular group were just happened to be couldn't play on a particular job for whatever reason. And so I actually did get to do that once too, and that what kind of spurred my interest in it, was just playing around with that in that rock band setting.
Michael has asked you, are you using Max/MSP, I assume?
Yes, it is. It's got a whole giant, confusing-looking Max patch that was created for it that it took me a very long time to understand as someone who had never used the program, and how to use it and how to practice with it. And when I do it, I have to have a very elaborate setup in my practice area, because you have to have a space for your computer and your foot pedal, and I have 3 microphones because you want to properly mic all the sections of the bassoon, because the piece goes from very high and very low. It doesn't just stick in the middle, which would be easier to mic. But so yeah, I've been looking for a way to premiere the piece for a little while now, because it's such a equipment heavy piece that it's been hard to find places that could do it. I've been kind of playing with some, or getting in with some electric acoustic music festivals. I'll come back, Mike. I had so much fun when we came to you guys a few years ago. But I've been doing some electric acoustic music festivals over the last couple of years before the pandemic shut everything down. And so I'm hoping that I can do that there because I feel like that's an audience that's really going to appreciate what's happening.
Could you tell us what a Max MSP is?
Not as probably well as Michael can, but it's a computer program that basically, if you look at it, it looks like a circuit board. And essentially what it does is you input sound, and using different programming options, you can influence what comes out, the input, how it comes out of the program. But it's something that I'm pretty sure most composition programs in the country are now teaching at levels. It's generally, from what I've heard, the program that's the default program for electronic compositions, and for people who are doing various things with like electronics and amplification and such.
It's a free program, and it's really designed for interactivity. So if you're doing something with like the Jamie Sampson piece with fixed media, then it's not what you would use. But it's designed, basically you can build it in that it listens to the performer and reacts in some way based upon the way that the composer plays with there are all of these modules you can sort of put together in the program in terms of how it reacts. So it can be triggered by a specific note or by a rhythm or by the foot pedal, by various other things. And then that sets a little algorithm into play.
Yeah, and the piece that Dylan wrote for me, the first 30 seconds of the piece has 4 cues that creates the vast majority of the sounds for the rest of the piece. So you play these 4 cues and you set at different points you hit a foot pedal to change the cue, and that first thing. So whatever you record in that first 30 seconds, that's what that performance is going to be. So every performance will be slightly different.
Could you share with us something that you wish you knew when you were in your 20s?
I wish I knew in my 20s that there were a lot more ways to make a living playing bassoon. I think when a lot of us get to undergrad or even graduate school, you're like, you can be a college bassoon teacher or you can play in an orchestra. And that's just not really the case anymore. I think a lot of it's different than it was when I started college 20 years ago. But there are so many groups now. You look at like Carol Lamore, who plays in her multiple chamber groups, or even Joey with his group. You can play and create a chamber group with people you know. Bassoonist I know by the name of Dana Jessen is like heavily influential in the world of improvisation, and she just makes these incredible performances of music. I say look them up if you can, because if you haven't heard them, but just she's doing things that you would never do in a lesson in undergraduate bassoon playing. She's making a lot of sounds that you would tell your young students not to do, but it's incredible because she has so much control over it. And just there's military groups, which is a way to play, and there's just a lot of different ways that there wasn't before to be a bassoonist. And I really wish, because I could have saved myself some heartache in school if I had known that and could have directed my attention and my focus towards the things I enjoyed instead of the things I thought I had to do because that was how you got a job. I think we focus so much on just doing it in the U.S. I've had a number of people I've run across who have found ways to go overseas and do obviously you're in New Zealand right now, but I know a bassoonist by the name of Aaron Pergrom, who teaches at Miami University now. He was in China for a number of years, and talking to him about that experience was like, I would have never thought to have tried to do something like that when I was in my 20s. But now, in my late 30s, knowing that it was an opportunity, I'm kind of like, I hope I didn't miss my boat to maybe try something like that later in life.
Do you have a music book recommendation for people that we could check out?
It's not music specific, but it was the first book I read this year. It was a book called Range by sports psychologist David Epstein. And it basically talks about how the best way, the way that people are finding the most success in the world right now is through generalization. And it's kind of come up and hit home a few times this year because there's been a few instances. There was a noted thing with TMEA about, basically only training bassoonists that we're going to like be super serious and major in it college. And, that came and went, but that kind of stuff like that. But there were various chapters. It's just like they'll talk about Fortune 500 companies and artists. And one of the chapters is all about, the students at Vivaldi's music school, where all those small girls could basically play virtuosically on every instrument of the orchestra at the time. And that's why we have all this great Vivaldi, is because a 14-year-old girl could whip through Vivaldi concertos that make most of us cry every time we see them. And because he was such a great teacher and did all these different things that could do all this stuff, and now we benefited, 300 years later because of, the generalization that these students had. And there was a couple times in there was one chapter, I have it highlighted in my Kindle because I read it there, and you can do like the highlight passage. I took a screenshot of it and I sent it to Albie Miklich, our former teacher at Arizona State. And I said, this is exactly what you do in lessons. And a lot of it was like, as opposed to just honing in on one specific little thing, he would say things like, the first thing out of his mouth almost every time you got done playing was, tell me about that. So that you were thinking about all this thing. Like, a lot of teachers I've studied with over time, they had their one or two areas that they would just hone in on you for going. But he would make sure that you were looking at every aspect of your playing, and not just, was your technique super clean? Was your pitch good? These things were important, but it wasn't important to focus on that. You had to be able to look at all the facets. You had to have a general view of your playing because, some people have beautiful tones and no fingers. Some people have amazing technique and can't play in tune. You got to have both sides of the card. And so that was something that book really kind of hit home with me, based a lot on, I said, like, some things that have happened over the last year that I've read about, and just the whole overall feeling of, after living in Texas and teaching high school level lessons in Texas, where it's so focused on, you got to do well at the regionals and you got to do well at the districts and stuff, where most of those kids aren't going to major in music. This is a valuable learning experience for them. And I wonder secretly if all of this rehearsal and emphasis on competition ruins the joy and is going to make them not enjoy music later in life when they're working in a chemistry lab or an accounting firm, and something they learned in band might come up as a way to solve a problem. So it was a really good book. I highly recommend it.
Is there a course from university that you wish had been offered for you to take?
Two, really, but the biggest one is I wish that I had been forced to arrange in college. I think my goal post-Army is I would like to be in teaching higher ed, because I very much miss that environment in the Army. It's just, the Army is great, but it's just not quite the same environment, and I really enjoyed my time in academia. But I think when I get there, if I'm coaching chamber groups, I'm going to ask all the members to just arrange like a 2.5-minute piece as part of the project for there. Because the greatest learning I've done, and something that's made me a way better musician, is arranging for my groups. And being able to go to my flute player in whatever group I'm playing at that time and go, can you do this? Or can you do this? Can you do such and such technique? Or can you play, how is this octave for you? And it just gives me a better understanding of the people I'm sitting in a group with, both on a personal and a musical level. Because I can see now in my arranging stuff as I go back and pull things out for different jobs, I know who was sitting in what seat in my quintet with every arrangement. I can tell you when I had excellent horn players and when I had not excellent horn players. And I can tell you, I had a flute player in San Antonio who had the most amazing flute blend, like almost to a fault. He could blend with anyone in the group to a point that he would disappear at almost any decibel level. And it was amazing. And you could create such incredible textures. Like I could pair him in ways that you wouldn't pair other people. And then I'll pull out the arrangement 4 years later and it doesn't work with the new flute player because that flute player, my current flute player, for all of her strengths, can't do what he could do with that one aspect. So it's a great way to learn the people you're playing with and the instruments you're playing with. And I think I did maybe one arranging project in an orchestration class in all 3 degrees I did. I'm not even sure if if that was offered in a couple of the schools I went to. And so it's just so important. And it's also just helpful to get fluency in music notation software, because you never know where you'll be when someone's like, I need you to do this thing. And if you're like me and you can't transpose very well, you need to be able to go and, whip out a part really fast and know how to put that in a professional looking thing that someone else can read, so that you can do that. That's probably my biggest one. My other one would just be, I think this has been mentioned a few times, but like personal finance. Before I joined, like, the one thing I really like about my job now is thankfully I have like one W-2 for the year for the most part. But I remember the years before when I was living in Arizona and you had a stack this big and you had to go to someone and they had to tell you what you could claim and what you couldn't claim, and how do you get, one year I bought a profiler and I did the valuation incorrectly for things like that, and it ended up costing me a bunch of money on my taxes. And these are things that we all have to think about, but that, especially with the changes in the tax laws in the last 3 years changing as much as they have, these things are things that people, like we as musicians need to know. So I think Lee said it last time, where she said, all musicians are your own small business. And you don't think about that until it comes to tax time and the accountant tells you it's not going to be $30 to do your taxes because you're a small business. It's going to be $400 to do your taxes. And if you'd had some training in college, I might have been able to do that stuff myself. I will tell you that maybe the single most appreciative audience I've had since joining the Army was we played at my wife's elementary school in 2016. And for reasons I still to this day don't understand, we decided we were going to do a woodwind quintet version of Katy Perry's Roar. Which, the only reason we did it was because you're playing for 7 and 8 and 9-year-olds. And it's a very catchy song that they all love. And so you got to, but we're woodwinds. I will admit that it still sounded very square. But it was also, by being able to do that arranging, we could get away with so much more for the rest of the assemblies we had with the kids, because you spent that 3 minutes playing something that you arranged that you knew they loved they had buy-in for the rest of the performance because we played Katy Perry.
Did they show it? Could you see how excited they were? Like, did they recognize?
We had trouble playing because they were singing along. I'll say and it's been 7 years now, but Frozen is still the same way. If you play Let It Go from Frozen, you will not be able to hear what's going on in your group in a gymnasium full of children. They will be singing Let It Go at full volume. That movie will not die.
Just think about it. It's so freeing, though. Let it go. Just let it go. A mantra.
It transcends the movie itself, I think. It's going to be it's more a mantra, like she said.
I'll say, it doesn't hurt that Robert and Kristen Lopez are amazing composers and songwriters. I mean, that doesn't hurt that they've snuck up on us in the past. If you watched the show WandaVision earlier this year, they wrote so much good music for that we're going to try to use at Halloween time this year for our quintet. But yeah, just doing that with the arranging, it's a simple way for us to have buy-in. Like I said, the lieutenant colonel in charge of my band likes Star Wars. And he mentioned one time that how much he enjoyed a group playing The Mandalorian. So now almost every group plays it if we know he's going to be there. Because if you can play you can play your boss's favorite music, that person has more buy-in to your group. And we've had soldiers, we used to play graduations for Army medic graduations. And we would play a Super Mario medley at what is supposed to be a very serious graduation ceremony. The only audience were these soldiers who were just at a course that they were going to get to go home the next day. So playing this upbeat thing where they recognized the music, they immediately bought in. So being able to put together that arrangement and arrange for the audiences we play for, really, it's a great advantage, but also it's just a great learning tool.
Could you share with us something new that you've learned recently?
Yeah, so I also not necessarily know if it's learned, but it's discovered maybe, is that in the last year, you know, we've all had our various, everyone has had their own struggles, their own battles. But in the last few months, I've just kind of come to the realization that what you need to do to survive a difficult situation is different for everybody. And everyone goes through the journey in a different way. I remember talking to people at the Meg Quigley thing in January, and people saying things like, "This is the year I've practiced the least," and other people saying like, "This is the year I've by far practiced the most." And I think and kind of sat on that for a little while and thought to myself, well, they're both right. You know, it's how we get through various things. My wife is actually doing extensive research now on trauma in education, and what I'm realizing is that just every person's journey is going to be extremely different. So even if if you don't understand or you think that someone is doing something wrong, maybe ask and see what they're doing, because maybe you're going to learn something from their journey that'll help you on yours.
Thank you, everybody, for joining today, and thank you, Martin.